Shalom, y'all. Tonight is Wednesday. It's the night for NETIV, and I'm back to host another. This one's very complicated. Um, we're in the month of Tammuz. I don't know how many of you understand the month of Tammuz. Tammuz 17, which was yesterday, was the Great Fast. All of the Jews Orthodox Jews, went through the understanding of fasting because it was a significant day in the loss of things that happened. Today, on the other hand, today is the 18th. According to the Jewish understanding, it was this morning, after sun came up, that the golden calf itself was smashed and judgment was passed upon the people. After that happened, Moses went back up onto the mountain to spend the next 40 days pleading for Israel. And so that's the great understanding. We also have to understand that on this day, temple services were disrupted in the first temple. And in the second temple, the walls were breached on this day. And so it's a very big day of mourning. It's also the same day that the spies found themselves, well, not in a very good place because, again, they ended up spending the next 38 years in the wilderness. Each month has its own energy. Creation began with energy, and that's where my focus is going to try to be, is on helping you understand the energy that was involved and why some months have better energy, so to speak, than others. This month and the next month, Av, have less energy or poorer volumes of energy. And so hopefully I'll get into that next week. But I want to start out with something very simple, but yet very complicated. In the Bible, we begin with, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, the first word in there is Bereshit. Now, Bereshit has always been interpreted, if you read your King James or the Tanakh, you'll find that it's always read in the beginning. That's correct, but it's not the only way it's read. Because you see, in the beginning, that phrase is used four more times in the Bible. So if I go back and look at where it's used besides here, I have to learn something about what's going on. I need to understand the hidden meaning of the phrase in the beginning. So as I go back, I found out that in Jeremiah 26:1, it says, in the beginning of the reign of Jehoiakim. In Jeremiah 27:1, it said again, in the beginning of the reign of Jehoiakim. So twice now, in the beginning, speaks of the reign of a king. The next two times are also in the book of Jeremiah. And again, he says, in the beginning, the kingdom of Zedekiah. And that's in chapter number 28:1. Then finally, in chapter 29, verse 34, he again says, in the beginning of the reign of Zedekiah. So in the beginning is more than just the beginnings of the heavens and the earth. The beginning is supposed to teach us that in the beginning, the king was established. Who is the king? God. So the beginning is about God from the very first steps. Now, in the word in the beginning, the word God here is Elohim, which is the God of judgment. But it's also the understanding that what we're going to talk about is the creations of what is being created, how and when, and what's going on. So the goal of this first verse is really to tell us that the ultimate goal is the creation of God the King. Because you can actually read it, in the beginning, created God and the heavens and the earth. Bereshit bara. Bara is the second word. That's the word for create. So in the beginning, created God and the heavens and the earth. But it all points to the fact that God is the focus of the beginning. That's what we have to take from it. Now, Kabbalah teaches that if we're talking about the beginning and we're talking about God, then we're talking about what we call Malkut, which is the bottom of God's ability. It's the earth we stand on. That's what I would want to try to tell you. And so at this particular point, this is where we start. Now, science tells us in the very beginning that there's called the law of entropy. Entropy is just a scientific concept, and it basically deals with the fact that if you start out with disorder, it will remain disordered. It will remain chaotic. But yet when we watch and read the text, chaos starts, but chaos doesn't continue. Because in entropy, no matter what goes on, eventually everything collapses. So where do I find some of this kind of information? Well, I go to the second verse of Genesis chapter 1, and it begins after saying, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The next thing it tells me is chaos. It begins by saying, in that second verse, when the earth was astonishingly empty. Now, the word for empty is actually the word tohu. Tohu means chaos. So in the beginning, the world, the universe was chaotic. Everything was not fitted together, even though we hear the word heaven and earth. Now, heaven and earth leads me to a new story. We normally think in our imaginations that the heavens and the earth all started at the same time. And the answer is no. In the beginning, God created the heavens. The heavens expanded. Heavens began, according to science, some 13.5 billion years ago. According to the Kabbalists, it began about 15 billion years ago. So you get the idea that the heavens are something that are actually, well, they're old. So from this very early part, everything is chaotic. But chaos leads to something else. And the world was empty, and the darkness was upon the face of the deep. Darkness is hoshech. Hoshech is the word that we usually use when we're dealing with sin. It's night. It's darkness. But it's also bohu. And the word for bohu gives us another understanding of what's going on. It helps us to understand that the role of this heavens and earth, God created chaos. And then he began to organize the chaos. So it began, there was a astrophysicist, and he was also a biologist. He had 2 doctorates, Gerald Schroeder, who has recently passed away, I think, within the last year. And he wrote several books. In fact, if you go online, you'll find Dr. Schroeder's work, because he left a great number of lessons on YouTube dealing with the creation, how long it took, how much occurred on the first day. And when we get the word day, we get the word yom, 24 hours. And that's the word that they use here. Gerald Schroeder says 24 hours, again, depends on time. Time began when? Time began with Bereshit, in the beginning. In the beginning, God created. In the beginning, he created time. So we start out with space and time. Those are the things that begin. That's what's happening. Now, he goes through talking to us, and before I go any further, I want to remind us of Nikola Tesla, that great scientist. He said, to understand creation, you're going to need to understand what energy is, what frequency is, and what vibration is. Energy started it all, but that's not where it ended. It just began it, and everything has continued because of the energy that was forced out. So we're going to begin to draw from 2 books that I have. Now there's 4 of them, but I only have 2. The first one I have is called Sefer Yetzirah. Sefer Yetzirah is the oldest of the Kabbalistic books on creation. It's the oldest. Now, it looks massive, and that's because within here are 3 different editions of that book. The book is actually only 25 pages, but in here, you also are given from Rabbi Ari Kaplan, you're given an understanding of what the words mean and how it fits together. It's still a difficult book because they're Hebrew words that you're going to have to go back and look up and research. But this is one of the first books that I ever had. The second book I've got is called The Bahir. The word Bahir means brilliance. So what we're going to read about is the brilliance and how it began. Creation, Sefer Yetzirah, brilliance, Bahir. Those are the two books that I'm going to use. Now, there's more books that are available, like, for example, dealing with another of Ari Kaplan's books, and that's the book that's called Immortality, Resurrection, the Age of the Universe. And he goes into a lot of things regarding creation. That's another one. Another book that I've used is 913, The Secret Wisdom of Genesis. All these books are what you would call Kabbalistic. In other words, the design of these books is not to tell you the story over and over again. It's to go deeper into the story, to go as deep as you possibly can go. Understand that when you read the Bible, you can read it on 4 different levels. The first level is called Peshat. It's the simplest level. It's word for word. This is what it means. This is it. Second level is called Remez. Remez is the idea of hints, the idea of things being there, but not easily seen. The third level is called Drosh. Drosh means to thresh out. That's where you go through parables. That's where you go through those hiddenness of stories. And finally, the level that we're going to be spending some time in is the level called Sod. Sod. Now, those 4 levels, Peshat, Remez, Drosh, Sod, those are acronyms for the word Pardes. Pardes is the word for paradise. So when you and I finally pass over to the other side, we're going to be going to school there in an orchard, in this place where we're going to grab the fruit of the trees, the fruit of all of these studies. And God is going to clue us into what we possibly didn't know. Now, most of us don't know Hebrew. I know it, but I don't know it that well. I have to admit, I didn't start my Hebrew understandings until I was in my 50s, late 50s. And so I've been working at it. My pronunciations are terrible, but I'm beginning to do as much as I possibly can. But as we're going through understanding, we have to know that we start with some problems. But let's go back to what's going on. I want to quote something for you here, and it's in physics. This is the definition of energy. In physics, energy is the quantified property that is transferred to a body or to a physical system, recognizable in the performance of work and in the form of heat and energy. So when we normally are talking about what I would call energy, we usually think of it in terms of heat and light. Those are the 2 forms. It becomes very understandable that heat and light were part of what we today call the Big Bang. In the beginning, there was an explosion. That explosion sent out particles in all directions. We're at the edge of one direction. We're not the edge of all the worlds. In fact, we can see beyond us, there's more galaxies. So we're in the midst of galaxies, and we're not at the edge of any of them. But from the center, we can understand that heat and energy were sent out. Energy is a conserved quantity. The law of conservation of energy states that energy can be created, but it cannot be destroyed. Only its form can be changed. So energy is created, and it changes. And if it changes into what we call in science matter, things. Things can be changed back into energy. But it all goes back to those same things. We can create light and heat from energy. And energy then is the focus of tonight. That's what I want to get to. So let's go on and let me share the rest of that first day. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And when the earth was astonishingly empty and with the darkness upon the face of the deep, and the divine presence hovered over the surface of waters. Now, it doesn't tell us he created water, but obviously water was created. God said, let there be light. Well, if God said, let there be light, then there had to be darkness. And if there was darkness, who created it? God. That was one of the things that God created. So God has created in the very beginning the heavens and the earth. He's created chaos, and he's created a void. He's created for us water. He's created for us, light and darkness. All that are created on that first day. But notice nothing in specifics is created. No mountains, no lakes, no trees, nothing. The first day as he begins to shape, begins to put things together. The second day, he's going to do what? He's going to create for us firmament, rock, minerals. The lowest form of substance is a rock. That's where we begin. From rocks, he's going to move into what we call plants and trees. That's the second level. And the fifth day, he goes and he adds animals. As you can see, he's going and he's creating as he goes along. As the light passes out, it begins to slow down. And as it slows down, it creates matter, rocks, continues on, creates plants. What happens? God has to initiate in the plants. He has to initiate life. And it goes on and on. Finally, on the sixth day, he creates his greatest masterpiece, man. So we begin to go from the simple, which is nothing but chaos, to a more complex, to the rocks, to the plant life, to animals, to humans. That's the order he goes. And it all began with energy. Energy from a singular point. That's what's going on at this point in time. We're not in it, but a couple of weeks ago, we were in the Parsha Shlach. I don't know if you remember Parsha Shlach. In it, it deals with the last part, deals with the tzitzit and the talit, the garment that the Jewish people wear, the prayer garment. The tzitzit are the very important part of that garment. The garment itself, it's the tzitzit that really speak to us. If you look at the knots on the bottom, you're going to find 613 knots. Actually, 620 when it's all said and done. 620 knots representing the law, both the law for the Jews and the laws for the Gentiles. You're also going to see on the corners of the garments the object that I call tzitzit. Tzitzit are made with strings that are tied off at the corners of each of the garments. Now, in ancient times, and until we really know for sure, in ancient times, there was one string that had to have a techlet, a bluish green color to it. Then the people began to ask, oh, by the way, that's Numbers chapter 15, verse 39, to help you understand. So in order to create this one string, it had to be dyed. And so the dye was created, made from something. But again, it's not understood where it comes from. Many people think it came from a clam. Some think it came from a mollusk. Lots of different ways of looking at it. But anyway, goes on from there. The sages state, and this is a section out of Sota, this sages state that the blue represents the sea, which reflects the sky, which is likened to God's throne, which is described as being sapphire blue, like teklet, like those strings at the corner. And that's in Sota 17a. So he begins by describing for us this color that's going to be there. Well, the color itself really is, it's to remind us of something else. And we'll get into it later, but we're going to talk about the strings that hold the stars and the planets in their place, because that's where Kabbalah goes in this particular case. Everything in the Bible is related to something else, either by numeric value, by the letters in the words that can be permutated and reused in lots of different ways. Everything is related. Not one letter in the Torah is wasted. Not one letter is used inappropriately. It's all got its place. That's the important thing to understand. So this string was created, and it's to represent what happened on the first day. It's going to be very distinct, and it's actually one of those things that we talk about. If you go to the book of the Talmud and the book Haggadah 12a, it tells us that in the beginning, heaven and earth, tohu vobohu, light, darkness, water, wind, and the measure of the day and a measure of the night, all were created on that first day. We look for physical things, but it's more than just that. Now, the Talmud begins to talk to us about tohu and begins to explain to us lots of different things. When we go into bohu, bohu talks about rock. Rather strange topic. But beneath the surface of the earth, deep within the earth, is rock that is spongy, not solid like what we find on the surface of the earth. It's spongy rock. In fact, it holds water. Remember in the beginning when Noah, the flood came, 40 days it rained, but it didn't wash everything away. It may have raised the water level, but the grounds broke forth. And from the ground comes this same water. This spongy rock water all flows up. That is what eventually caused the massive flood that caused the death of all of those people and all of the animals, those things. Now, in the book of Isaiah, in chapter 34, verse 11, it begins by saying, the proof for this is found in a verse, and he shall stretch upon it a line of tohu, a line of chaos, and the stones of bohu, the spongy stones. Those things are going to happen. Now, there's a hole that was dug in Russia. My wife and I both looked for it, tried to find out what the hole was supposed to be about. It's called the Kola Super Deep Borehole. It's huge. It is so deep, it is deeper than the Mariana Trench, which is the deepest we can go into the earth from the sea, and that's 40,230 feet. And it's taller, or if it were high, it's taller than the tallest mountain, Mount Everest. That is how big it is. And it's a huge hole. What they were looking for, I'm not sure, but that's what happened. So they dug for this. Science understands that this is about energy that was used in search of energy, is the best that I can understand from what I've read. Now, when we think about scientific theories and we think about the Big Bang, last week I talked with you about 4 things that came out of this Big Bang, 4 forms of energy that came out of it. The first one was called electromagnetic force. Electromagnetic force is the force that holds atoms together. Inside of an atom, which is 99.9% nothing, as it's being held together, friction is created and energy, sparks of light, are emitted. So when it says in the beginning, light happened, that's where it came from. Now, the second thing that was created is called a strong nuclear force, and that's what holds the atoms together. In the midst of this struggle, light is coming forth, but that's what's going on. And the third one is called a weak radioactive force, and that allows for decay. things do decay. Their form is changed. No energy is lost, only its form is changed. Now, the last one that we talk about is called gravitational force. That's the force that holds, well, our solar system together. It holds all of us together. All of our skin cells, everything is being held together by this force. Now, we learned about this force years ago. Science has since the first of the 19th century and the 20th century, have been working with what Einstein called quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is another way of looking at creation, how it was done. And quantum mechanics is becoming more and more sophisticated. The more experiments that are done, the more scientists that are working on it. And in each and every case, they find out that there were not just 4 sources of energy, but they believe there are 10 sources of energy. Now, the names of the other 6, they're not certain what they are. In fact, they're not certain what they look like. You see, normally they think of them as being like dots or points of light. But at the same point in time, they understand that they're actually strings. Some of you may have heard of this, talked about the string theory. The string theory deals with the fact that there's 10 of them and they are intertwined. But if you go to the Talit and you go to the Tzitzit, what do you find? Strings. Strings. Strings are tying together all kinds of things. They're wrapped and knotted. Now, the knots that are on the Talit, on the strings that are held for the corners, those knots are tied in such a way that they are 4, 6, 4, 6, the idea of the name of God. As we go through this whole understanding, the Big Bang leaves us with questions about what's going on. But the string theory is what's becoming very much more prevalent. String theory says that not only is there our universe, but it's estimated, and again, it's estimated, there are 10 to the 500th power. 10 to the 500th power. Millions of worlds. Millions of worlds. I was looking today and couldn't find my section that it deals with the fact of inheritance in the world to come. In the world to come, the righteous will inherit worlds. Not a house, will inherit worlds. Now the question is, with these worlds that we're going to inherit, what do we do with them? I don't know. The more righteous one is, the more worlds they actually have. But this is one of the understandings that they have. Now, I want to go for a second, and hopefully this will work out easily. I want to go for a second to share with you this. Okay. You should all be able to see this. Energy, frequency, and vibration. It's called the role of energy in creation is marrying science and Torah. When we were looking at the second day, it talks about the waters above from the waters below. And the waters above speaks of heavenly wisdom. Water speaks to wisdom. That's an understanding from multiple verses in the book of Proverbs, book of Song of Songs, several places. That idea, whenever you see water, you can also reflect on wisdom. So there's the wisdom above, that's Torah, and below is the wisdom of science. Now, in between right now is firmament, solid ground that by the time God sends his Messiah, we begin to marry together those two worlds, the wisdom from above and the wisdom from below. Now, in the book Sefer Yetzirah, which I showed you in the beginning, which was written by Abraham, Well, it wasn't written by Abraham. Abraham spoke it. And as Abraham spoke the book, it was passed orally from person to person. In the first century, there was a rabbi named Akiva. And it was said that Akiva wrote down the oral sayings because he was afraid they would be lost. And so we're going to see, well, it's actually a 6-chapter book, but I'm only going to read the first section and the first of the 6th section. And it begins this way. In 32 Netzrim, which are mysteries, and 32 mysteries, Netzvot, or paths of wisdom, are engraved Yah. First line. We're going to see that there are mysteries, 32 of them. Well, 32 is not really a mystery because that's the understanding that we get when we put together the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet along with the 10 Sephirot. Those are the 32 pieces of mystery that we have to use like a puzzle, putting them together in different ways to help us understand things. A netzvot or netavot it's a path. Normally they use the word direct. That's the word that's normally used. But this word is netavot. In fact, tonight you're listening to NETIV. NETIV is a path. It's a private one. Each of us is walking on a path. Our paths are all different. They're mysterious. And they lead us to wisdom as we begin to study Torah. That's the goal, is to move that way. And as we move that way, we engrave the name of God. Where do we engrave it? On our heart. We take him in. We bring him in. Remember, where does God want to live? Not among us, but in us. That's what's going on. And by hakak, the idea is it's chiseled in us. In other words, it's not written with a magic marker. It's chiseled into us. It's like a hieroglyphic where they chisel it into the rock. So as we go on, it says, the Lord of hosts, Yud Vav Yud, God of Israel, the living God, King of the universe, also known as El Shaddai, which means enough, merciful and gracious, high and exalted, dwelling in eternity, whose name is holy. He is lofty and holy, and he created his universe with 3 books. The first one is called a Sefer. That's the word for writing. Sepharim is the word for a book, or Sephar is the word for a book. It's also the word for a number. Every letter in the Hebrew Bible is also a number. Every word can be added up to create another number. Can that number be found somewhere else? Does it give us another path? So we have a Sefer, which is a writing. We have a Sephar, which is a number. And we have Sipur, which is what we write, how we communicate with one another. It's when I pass out my lesson. That's what it looks like. That's a Sipur. So in the beginning then, this is what's going on. So in the beginning, God created for us a mysterious path that he wants us to travel. Now, most of us are afraid of going by ourselves. We'd rather travel a normal path. That's what church is for. You and I probably aren't in a church. We may be in a home group, or we may be just by ourselves. But the constant understanding is the fact that we are blazing for ourselves a trail, a path. And as we do that, we choose to follow the Torah. We choose to follow God. And as we're following God, we're moving closer and closer towards where he's at. That's the goal. And at the same time, he is moving closer to us. Not that he isn't in us, but our recognition of him becomes greater. There's a phrase that says, as above, so below. As we move, so he moves. Everything is going in cycles that direction. Now, as we go on, the second part of that section actually said that there are 10 sephirot of nothingness. There are 10, and we'll get into that later, and 22 letters. And we'll get into the letters, the numbers, the doubles, and all of the other things. But understand that we're moving towards God. That's our goal. Maybe I should give you this. Oops, here I am. Okay. See if I need to go back one. Oops. Screen stop. Try again. Yeah, here we go. Okay, I'm sharing you again. Slideshow. Okay. Not from the beginning. Here we are. In Sefer Yetzirah, again, in the story or the book of creation, in the 6th chapter, it begins with a very cryptic set of words. These are the 3 mothers spoken of in chapter 1. Well, we didn't go that far, so let me tell you about the 3 mothers. The 3 mothers are 3 letters from the Hebrew alphabet that are very, very significant. The first letter is Aleph. Aleph is number 1. It's the first of all. Aleph is the ground by which everything hangs. It's the first. Second is Mem, which is a middle letter. It's the 13th letter. It deals with something else. And finally, Shin is the 3rd letter. Now, if you look off to the right, I built you what I call, or what they call, the tree of life. The tree of life is basically composed of 10 circles, which are called sephirot. In between are bars that run between those letters. Those bars contain a letter. And so what you have then are 32 paths. The path between Keter and Hokmah, that path that's right there, tells us that the connector between knowledge and that which is unknowable is Aleph. It's where we begin. From Keter down to Binah, there's another letter. That letter happens to be the letter Shin. Shin is another one of those letters that we have to look at. So it goes on to say, and from them emanated 3 fathers. Father is a word to describe something that is larger than us. And in this case, the 3 fathers are air, water, and fire. Air comes from Aleph. Water comes from Mem. Shin comes from fire. Shin would be Ish. Mem is Mime, which means water. And Aleph is the beginning of the thinking. So all of these are descendants. So these things are most important. Now, the 3 fathers and their descendants, air, water, fire, create for us 10 or 7 planets and their hosts. The 7 planets are actually 5 planets and the sun and the moon. Because in the beginning, as Abraham is looking into the sky, he can't see Uranus. That's outside of his vision. All of the others from Saturn this way are part of his vision. So he sees this. Remember back to Genesis chapter 16? In Genesis chapter 16, God takes Moses out, or Abraham, out of the tent and brings him outside, and he says, look up at the sky. And he looks up at the sky. Now, understand that Abraham was an astrologer, not the kind that does horoscopes, but he can read the stars and he understands things that are found in the stars that are telling. He says, as many as the stars in the skies are, that's how many kids you'll have. Avram, which was his name at that time, says, well, that doesn't work because my name isn't in the stars. And he says, your name will be in the stars because I will add a letter to your name. And so he adds the letter H, or Hey. He comes from his name. Remember, his name is spelled Yud He Vav He. So this second letter, the first He, is added to his name. He becomes the father of many nations. Now, the second He will be given to his wife. His wife's name is Sarah or Sarai. She'll become Sarah. And so she'll become that princess over all of those tribes. Now, there are 12 diagonal boundaries, and you can see the boundaries or the diagonals on this line. You have the straight, then you have diagonals. Those diagonals are letters that are there. So there's 7 planets and their hosts. The hosts would be the moons, and there are 10, 12 diagonal boundaries. Now, the proof and the true witness of this is universe, year, and soul. And we'll get to that in a second. And a rule of 12 and the 7 and the 3. There were 12 letters that only have a singular purpose. There are 7 letters that have sounds that make the letters sound alike. And finally, there's my 3 mothers, my 3 host letters. Now, he set them in the tele, in the cycle, and in the heart. The tele, the cycle, and the heart. Going too fast. Stop. Okay, back to where we were. The tele, which is the first mysterious word, which comes from the Bahir. It deals with the brilliance of things. Tele is the idea, or the beginning of the idea of the universe. The tele is our universe, everything around us. That's the beginning of all things. So in this particular thing, we begin with the universe. From the universe, we get smaller. We move to what we would call cycles. And by cycles, maybe I should have put this up. In cycles, we have this. This is an astroglobe from, I think it's 1600. As you can see, it's in Hebrew, but that's not the important thing. In the beginning, there were 2 ideas of the earth. One idea was that the earth was flat and there was a dome over the top of it. And as the dome passed over the top of it, high above the dome was what was called a specific constellation. And everything else circled, Galgal, around it. In the center was the city of Jerusalem. That was the center, or Israel, if you would. And these circling around it were the 12 signs of the zodiac. And if you go back to learning about the 12 brothers, you'll find that each brother was born in a different month, and each brother represents a different month. And so you begin to get some understanding. Now, the circles that you have here connect to the outside. These are called nodes. Nodes are the strings where everything is held together. In other words, if I put up a mobile that hangs from a hanger, I have strings, and everything hangs from these strings, hangs from these nodes. And all of the constellations are hanging from the nodes. Now, the constellation at the top of our story, way at the top, was the constellation called Draco the Dragon. Draco the Dragon. Draco is a constellation. It has multiple stars. And if you want to think about it, these stars are located in such a way that they circle around the earth, and strings hang from every one of the stars. Way back 4,500 years ago, one of the stars of Draco is called Tehillim. Tehillim was actually what we would call the North Star. Because of the tilt of the earth and everything else, the North Star is no longer Tehillim, and we begin to move to a new star, and soon that North Star will not be the North Star any longer. There will be one that's found in this, I believe it's in Cephas, the king, will become the North Star, and I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head. See what happens when you have astronomy millions of years ago. Anyway, so the idea is that there's these strings that hang down. These strings attach all of the constellations. And so in the Jewish understanding, these constellations go around, and as they go around, they give us a particular month of energy. Each one produces its own set of energy. Now, Draco in your Bible isn't called Draco. It's usually called Nahash Beriach, which is called the pole serpent. The pole serpent, because it's at the top. Everything hangs from that particular place. In Job, chapter 26, verse 13, it says, by his breath the heavens were spread. His hand caused pain to the Nahash Baruch, to the bar-like serpent. In Isaiah 27:1, it says, on that day the Lord shall visit with his hard and great and strong sword on Leviathan, the bar-like serpent, and upon Leviathan, the crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea being the space, the area above. That's what's going to happen in the future. This is where it's going. Okay, stop sharing. At this point, I want to stop for a little bit. I've given you way too much information if this is your first time hearing it. I will again promise you that I will talk about it again and again and again. Most often, people who have learned it correctly only need 7 attempts to learn the material. If you learned it wrong in the beginning, it's only going to take you 27 attempts to unlearn it before you can start the 7 attempts to relearn it. So that's my promise to you at this point in time. It's a rather strange way of looking at things. But we're talking about the sky, and we're talking about energy in the sky. As we begin to focus on the months, we're going to see that this energy, that it becomes physical, becomes matter, becomes something that it vibrates to something that, well, the idea is the fact that each thing creates energy for itself. When you are sitting where you're at, or if you've ever seen a flower in a magazine, every being has what's called an aura around them as long as they're alive. That aura, that special light, is that light from the very beginning. That's what you've got going for you. Now, as we begin to learn some of this, we're going to learn about this energy that is upon us. That's my hope. That's my lesson for next time. And I'll pick up here where I left off next time. But I hate to ask if you have a question, but if you do, Mary, who's already raised her hand,